What is up, MFers? Hope you guys are having an amazing day. Today we're going to do some talking about tackle in the garage here, as you guys can see right back here behind me. One of the most frequent questions I get on social media, I get asked all the time if I'm going out fishing for the first time or if I'm an experienced fisherman, I kind of want to dive into some more different techniques. What fishing rod do I need for this technique, or what fishing rod would be best for this body of water that I fish? You guys do not need to go out and buy 20, 25, 30 rods to be successful as a fisherman. So in the video, I'm going to tell you guys exactly what techniques, what type of bend, length, action, specific type of casting or spinning rod you want for all different types of techniques. I'm also going to tell you the reels that I have on these rods. So I've got 5 rods laid out right here next to me, but when I get asked all the time, what is the one rod I should go pick up that I think can do a lot of different techniques, this is the answer right here. This is the 7-foot medium heavy MFer stick, once again in my series, because this rod right here can do about anything you want it to outside of medium to deep cranking and ultra finesse stuff. You can get away with this rod almost every time you go out on the water and catch fish on almost every single bait. I've thrown everything from chatter baits to single hook swim baits to blade baits, shaky heads, top waters. You can do a ton of different things with this rod right here. Since it does have a faster action, it's good to rip baits out of grass and stuff like that if you are going to throw a treble hook bait on it. To me, the sweet spot is probably right around that 3/8 of an ounce. It makes a really good lighter Texas rig rod. It makes a really good light jig, finesse jig. And then of course the top hook swim bait rod and stuff like that. And that really goes for any true medium heavy 7-foot bait casting rod. That's where I would start to go out and pick up a rod to check out. And the great thing about this one is too, I don't want to make this too much of a commercial for my rod series, but we're going to come out with the 4-piece model in this guy as well, the travel model. So I don't hardly ever go on fish on the bank without this rod because it is so versatile. We're gonna be able to have this one right here that'll be able to put in your backpack. And I've never had a really high quality rod until this one came along that I could pack that small, that wasn't, you know, just a piece of junk Walmart rod or something like that. But for those of you guys asking me, what is the one rod in the series to go out and pick up that can do the most? I would probably say for baits under 3/4 of an ounce to an ounce, all the way down to 1/4 of an ounce or even 1/8 of an ounce. And if you want to throw on a bait caster, this right here is the rod for you. Now, like I said, this is going to be more of a rod video, but I'm going to show you the reels I like as well. So on the 7-foot medium heavy rod, I really like this smaller size Shimano Corrado. This is a 70 size reel. I usually spool with 12 or 15 pound fluorocarbon line. Unless I am going to throw some top waters like some little walking baits or poppers or stuff like that, I will put a little braided line on it. But 12 or 15 pound fluorocarbon seasonally, depending on what I'm doing, generally covers the tactics. But I like this smaller 70 size reel because a lot of times I'm throwing my wing ding, stuff like that, jerk baits, things that are hard to cast in the wind a lot of times. It's really good to have a smaller reel that has really high quality components that can handle those light baits in the wind. This is actually an 8:2-to-1 gear ratio reel. Like I said, generally I'm not winding with this. I'm throwing more Texas rigs, jigs, jerk bait, stuff like that, where I want to take up a lot of line when I pick up on the slack line. And so I do usually like a faster 7 or 8 speed reel. Okay, next rod up is going to be like the last rod in length a little bit, but it's totally different in action. So action is where the rod bends as opposed to how stiff it is, which is going to be the power of the rod. And this is a crankbait rod right here. This is the 7.2 medium heavy moderate fast taper crankbait rod in the MFer series. This is an awesome crankbait rod. Let me tell you why. So about 10 years ago, when I got heavy into tournament fishing, there wasn't a whole lot of rods like this one on the market. And this is exactly what I had in mind and what I wanted. So a lot of the crankbait rods were made of glass still. Glass is very slow, which is great for a crankbait because it gives the fish time to inhale. When I say slow, I mean it has a slow action, which means it bends throughout the entire rod when you put pressure on the tip or on the bait. Problem with glass is it's super heavy and it's super dull and not sensitive. And so you couldn't feel what your bait was doing down there very well. A lot of guys still prefer to crank with. That's their opinion. My opinion is I really don't like glass crankbait rods. And I also wanted a rod that was able to handle stuff that was really small crankbaits and have the ability to throw some of the medium to deeper diving crankbaits. Now I know your rod that you're going to throw a little 6-cents smaller mini crankbait that weighs 1/4 or 3/8 of an ounce is not going to be able to handle a C25 1.5-ounce, 25-foot diver. I totally get that, but I wanted one in the series that would be able to cover the widest range possible, and that's what we did with this one. This is a graphite rod. It's a moderate fast, which means it's not a fast action rod. It's not a super slow glass type rod. It's somewhere right in the middle. Anything that has a treble hook, outside of a bait that dives over 15 feet or weighs less than 1/4 of an ounce, that's what I throw on this rod right here. If you want to throw top waters on it, it's great for treble hook topwater baits. Of course, then I would throw it on braid, but I almost always spool this reel with 15-pound test fluorocarbon. This is a 6:3-to-1 gear ratio reel. I love a 6-speed reel for cranking. That is so important to me. I don't want one that's too fast because it's constantly overpowering the bait and making it blow out a lot. And I don't want one that's too slow because a lot of times those fish will engulf the entire bait coming at you and you can't pick up on the bait fast enough and you lose that fish. But this rod right here is absolutely perfect. So if you guys are in the market for a crankbait rod that can do a wide different variety of techniques, I love this length. A lot of them on the market, if you want to check it out, anything that's 7'2" to 7'4" probably is right there in that sweet spot. I think a 7 foot's too short to cover some of the 10 to 15 foot divers. I like to have that extra length. Or this makes a great lipless bait rod as well. And that's another technique where you're snatching the bait constantly through grass and you want to have some more length in that rod to rip out of the grass and then pick that line up when that fish snatches it right after that. Specifically, this reel is a Shimano Slx Dc. I've had a lot of trouble with these reels when it comes to flipping. I don't think the gears can hold up to a 20 to 25 pound line or even heavy braided line and winching fish at a hard snap hook set out of grass or out of a dock or out of timber or something like that. But it's made for an awesome cranking rod. When you're throwing little baits, like I throw my my Crush 50X on this, that's a 3/8 ounce bait. A lot of times you're throwing that in the wind, or even the flat 75 can catch some wind a lot of times. The dual braking system on this is perfect for that situation. Okay, so we have 2 bait casting rods so far. We have any baits that are from 1/4 of an ounce up to 3/4 of an ounce, covered with that 7-foot medium heavy rod. And then we have the crankbait rod, the 7.2 medium heavy moderate fast, which can cover a wide variety of different crankbait techniques outside of ultra deep cranking or super finesse cranking. Next up, I think, is a very important rod for everyone to have, and that is, of course, a spinning rod. So really what I like to do with the spinning rod is I'll get it in the mail, I'll take it out of the rod tube, and I'll rip it out of the packaging. And the first thing you want to do is snap it over your knee and throw it in the trash can. There is no place for spinning rods in your arsenal. This is the one spinning rod I have in my 7-rod series, the 7-foot medium moderate fast taper. It's more of a fast taper on this rod, but basically this rod's for everything with light line, finesse techniques, and spinning rods don't really come ubiquitous in their actions. A lot of spinning rods are ultra noodly. They're great for exposed hook drop shots like this one's actually set up for. Of course, there's no weight on the bottom of it because it whipped out in the ride on the way home. But you either have super whippy spinning rods or you have more of a stiff backbone with a fast tip that works a little bit better for shaky heads, for Ned rigs, stuff like that, where you actually have a single hook and you need to kind of power through some plastics a lot of times on a shaky head or a Texas rig or something like that. This one's kind of in the middle. I feel totally comfortable throwing a shaky head, and I think it has the backbone to actually rip that bait through the plastic and get a hook in them, but at the same time it has a light enough tip and a light enough action throughout the rod that I always feel comfortable drop shotting with it as well. I think there's definitely better rods out there to drop shot with than this one right here. They're way lighter, but the problem is with a lot of those specific exposed hook drop shot rods for spinning rods, they just flat out don't have enough backbone to do about any other technique. I chose the 6'10" size because I just think it's nimble enough. It's lighter and more sensitive and nimble, more so than like a 7-foot or a 7'2". Generally, I like as long a rod as possible as you can get away with, but when I'm fishing spinning rods, I'm throwing little tiny stuff. That's exclusively what I'm throwing it for. So I wanted it to be small enough, yet at the same time, I think the 6'6" and smaller and shorter rods flat out don't move enough line when you set the hook. So I found it perfect, 6'10". Anything 6'9" to 6'11" has been my sweet spot. I went with 6'10" on this one right here. But that's what you guys should look for when you're going out to purchase a spinning rod, is something that has fast enough tip that you feel like you can throw little tiny baits on, but it shuts off and has enough power. And then as far as reel goes that I put on this guy, this is actually one I've been really impressed with. I usually don't have a lot of luck with Abu Garcia products holding up. This one actually has held up really well the last couple of years. This is the Abu Garcia Revo Rocket. It's kind of a more expensive reel, but it's super fast, which I like because I'm generally not winding baits on this spinning rod. I'm usually dragging baits or drop shotting. It allows me to pick up a lot of line when that fish eats. One knock I've had on spinning tackle for a very long time is the reels are just too slow. They're 4 and 5 speed gear ratio reels. and that's just a nightmare to fish with, in my opinion, especially when you're using top hook baits like a shaky head or a Ned rig or even a drop shot. You want to be able to pick that line up, and this guy does it very well. Now, as far as line goes on my spinning rods and spinning reels, I guess it would be, every single one of my reels has the exact same thing. I have anywhere from 8 to 20 pound at the very max, but usually 10 or 15 pound braided line to a fluorocarbon leader, and I almost exclusively throw 8 or 10 pound test fluorocarbon leader. If I am drop shotting, I will bump it down sometimes. I would go to like a 6 pound test, or if I'm trout fishing or something like that, I'll bump down to a 4 pound test. And then if I'm fishing really, really heavy cover and kind of nasty or watery or stuff like that, maybe I'll bump up to 12 pound test on my leader to skip around docks or something like that. But generally a 6 foot to a 10 foot leader on this, and then I'll just retie until it gets down to a couple feet. But yeah, that's my spinning rod combo. That's what I think is the perfect one for the most variety of techniques. Okay, time to bump the power up a notch, and I'll show you probably my most used rod in the entire series, and that is the 7'4" heavy fast. This is the Wizard, the Zark Special, the Staff is a lot of you guys call it. But this guy's a workhorse for any type of heavy baits. It's kind of a slower, moderate fast action rod, but it has power all the way through the tip, which makes it awesome for a lot of different techniques. I've done everything from throwing a jig, swing head, swim jig, top hook swim bait, Carolina rig, frog. You can put braid on it and throw a frog on top. You can throw a big walking bait on top. I don't really know what this rod can't do, from 3/8 of an ounce up to 1.5 ounces. You could even punch or heavy flip or flip docks or pitch, skip. This is a great skipping rod if you guys are looking for a great skipping rod. It has enough load on the end of the rod that the whole rod loads up and shoots that bait up onto the dock. If you guys need some examples, you should probably watch some of the videos where Zark has absolutely spanked him on a swim jig around the docks. For those of you guys that want more of an open water swim jig rod, I think a lighter, like 7 foot medium heavy up to a 7'4" medium heavy would be great for that. But if you're throwing it a swim jig around a lot of heavy grass, a lot of heavy docks like you guys see me do all the time, then this is the swim jig rod. This is what I throw my swim jigs on pretty much exclusively, and it does so much more as well. So when you're looking for a rod to fish baits like this one does, a jig rod or a Texas rig rod, when we design this rod, we want something to throw a lot of different techniques. But a lot of rod manufacturers make a mistake when they design some of their 7 foot, we'll say 2 to 7'6" medium heavy rods or heavy rods, is they put too fast of a tip on the rod. And so the problem with that is there's enough backbone to throw heavier baits on it or heavier jigs and stuff. But when you go to set the hook on a fish, you get all that tip and all that give with that first penetration of the hook. And that's been something that's been so key for me. I talked about it a long time ago, the importance of rod action when fishing a frog. And that's a technique that this rod works really well for as well. Now, I generally throw my frogs on the Milliken 7.5 extra heavy, but for the sake of this video, for one of the 5 rods I think you need, the 7.4 heavy is perfect. Where I'm going with that is needing power all the way through a tip on a rod is super important when you're throwing something maybe further away from you, or you're throwing something in heavy cover, or both. Because you need, when you set that hook, to get that hook all the way through the fish's mouth. And when you have a little noodly tip on the end of a rod that the rod manufacturer just threw on there to say it was a medium heavy, you're flat out not going to get as much hook penetration when you go to rear back on that hook. It's all the fundamentals, all the mechanics of it. And the problem with that is you end up with a stiffer and a lot of times a heavier weight-wise rod. But I'm totally willing to give that up no matter what rod or what rod series I'm looking for. Even if didn't have my own series or whatever, I'm totally willing to give up the sensitivity even and the lightness on that rod to be able to have power all the way through the tip in a rod that can really load up and drive the hook home immediately when you set the hook. So that's what I'm looking for, and that's how we designed this rod, the 7.4 heavy Zark Special. Now, to match that rod up, this is the reel that I love. I throw it exclusively on this rod because it is exactly a perfect complement. It is a workhorse reel. It's rock solid. There's no give. It does great with big line. It casts great offshore. It doesn't blow up hardly ever. With backlashes, this is the Daiwa to Tula. This is the 100 HS, and I throw it in a 7:3 gear ratio reel. The 7.3 is a great, I could even go faster if I wanted it for Carolina rigs or flipping or something like that. But the 7.3-1 is a great speed for me because it gives you the most power. A lot of you guys might not know this, but we'll get more into it in another video maybe where we talk about the power of a reel. The lower gear ratio you have of a reel, the more power and more torque you have when winching that fish. So a lot of times it seems like the best thing to do to throw an 8 or a 9 speed reel when you're flipping. And when it comes down to it, when you go to turn that handle, you can barely move it because it has less torque because of a higher gear ratio reel. 7.3-1 to me, perfect for torque, and at the same time, it's a nice mix of being able to be fast enough to pick up that line. Perfect rod and reel for this situation. I almost always throw 20 pound, I've just bumped it up, meat stick, meaty reel, meaty line, 20-pound fluorocarbon line, even when fishing offshore. I used to think that big line was not great for fishing offshore because it had more drag, didn't have a very good connection directly with your bait when you're fishing 15 plus feet of water. And now I'm just thinking like, I'm not gonna break off with this. I can throw it in the heaviest stuff. I don't personally think fish are line shy in water that has less of 10-foot visibility. And I don't think that the fish care if it's 20-pound test or 15-pound test. It's not hardly any different in their eyes. And that's just what I roll with. This is a badass setup. I'd say weight-wise on this rod, anything from 3/8 of an ounce up to almost 2 ounces. I've thrown actually my Nazuma Rat topwater on this, which is I think it's like a 2.5 to 3 ounce bait. But I say the sweet spot is right around 1 ounce. And keep in mind, that means if you're throwing a 3/4 ounce swing head plus a 1/4 of an ounce to 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce size plastic, that pumps you up over that 1 ounce. Or if you're throwing a 3/8 ounce swim jig, that bait in reality probably weighs 5/8 of an ounce with the trailer. So that is where this rod really shines. And last but not least, if you want to get into the swim bait game, let's talk about swim bait rods. Now I get questions all the time about what swim bait rod to go out and buy. If you look at the swim bait market, you really dive into it. You know, swim baits are anything from 2 inches, a little Kitech, to the Roman-made Mother Chaser, which is a 20-plus ounce bait. Wide variety of range and sizes, but I'm talking about big swim baits. And when I talk about big swim baits, I'm generally talking about 8 and 10-inch baits. Those two sizes, 8 to 10 inches, make up the wide variety of what I throw, whether it be a soft bait or a big glide bait. I think that's a great size for 4 to 10-plus pound fish. That size is perfect. Now, like I said, there's a lot of different types of rods when you're looking at a swim bait rod. Some rods are 7'6" and kind of a heavier action, but more ranged for like the 2 ounce baits. And some of them can handle baits that weigh up to 4 or 5 pounds, not ounces, pounds. So huge range on how long rods are, how much power, how much load. But this is my rod that I throw for anything from 2.5 ounces up to 6 or 7 ounces. This is the 7.9 extra heavy fast and the MFR series rod. It is perfect for the baits that I was just mentioning, like this guy right here. This is the Defiant swim bait. I believe that is a 4 ounce bait. The 210 size works great for the smaller size. I guess this is a smaller size, 210 millimeters. I think that's about an 8-inch bait. But I can also throw my Hinkle shads on them, which is up to like a 6.5 ounce bait. So I'll tell you what I'm looking for in a swim bait rod, and when I do that, I'm gonna tell you exactly how we designed this one right here. And it took a lot of attempts to get it just right. What I'm looking for is something, because I fish every day. I'm a tournament guy and I make videos every single day. So I didn't want a rod that was super heavy and cumbersome and could only be used for one specific bait, a super giant heavy bait. I wanted a rod that I could go out and throw a bunch of different swim baits on, and so that took a special type of taper. I wouldn't say this is a fast rod. I wouldn't say this is a moderate rod. It's somewhere in the middle. It has a decent amount of tip on it for a swim bait rod, but at the same time, the tip kind of transitions nicely into a load on the backbone of the rod that you are able to throw something the size of a Hinkle shad and not feel like you're totally overpowering the rod. Sweet spot on this one, probably 3 to 5 ounces, I say, was the sweet spot on it. This Defiant throws perfect on it. Depth Slide Swimmer 250 throws perfect on it. That's about a 5 ounce bait. I'm blown away by this rod. Another thing was a lot of swim bait rods, you know, are 8.5, 9 feet long now. I do fish tournaments, so I had to have something. Most tournaments have the cutoff at 8 feet. Anything above that is an illegal rod to throw. Ended up with a 7'9". When we originally set out to design this rod, I wanted something that I could throw 6-inch weedless baits, Alabama rigs, 2 ounce Huddlestons and stuff like that, because I thought that would kind of appeal to the masses a little bit more. But when I got this blank, I was like, holy shit, I can throw a 6.5 ounce hinkle shad on it. And I was like, no, 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 scrap all that. We want a rod that we can try to do all those things. And that's what we ended up with. I don't think this rod has enough meat and enough backbone to be able to throw a 10-inch to 12-inch top hook bait. You want to, again, just like the Zark rod, you'd want something like that where you had power all the way through the tip of the rod and it was super heavy and meaty, and when you cracked them on the first hook set, it was going to stick them. But this rod being a little bit softer tip allows me to throw a lot of the treble hook baits, which I love to throw glide baits, stuff like that on this rod. And with glide baits, you also want a little bit of tip in the rod so you can kind of drag and pull that bait through its glide as it goes side to side. And of course, you don't want an ultra stiff rod when you're throwing treble hook baits. You want something with a little bit of give. This one has just enough give and just enough moderate tip to be able to do that, but I'm super happy with it. In my opinion, this reel that I have on here is the best reel that you can go out and buy for a wide variety of different swim bait techniques, excluding the small stuff and the ultra giant stuff. This is the Shimano Tranx 300 size. It's the slower size. I know they make it. I also have the bigger size, which is I think it's a 7.8. You guys might correct me. Maybe it's an 8.2 gear ratio reel. This one's a 5.8 gear ratio reel, but once again, the torque of a lower gear ratio reel is perfect. You can crawl this bait on the bottom like a lot of people like to fish it. It's a top hook bait, or it's nice and it can, you know, cast that hinkle out there. You can slowly drag it and pull it through the water. And I do feel like you can burn baits if you needed to fish like a bull shad on top or something like that. But generally when I'm fishing a swim bait, a big bait like this, I want it to look slow, dazed, confused, just a little bit different than, did I just say dazed and confused? Cool. I want that bait to look slow, not moving, like it's dying, like it's singled out. I want to draw the attention of a big fish and have the big fish look at that bait and really analyze it. And then I can kind of work my action, my twitches and everything with the rod tip to get it to react. But to me, that's the perfect rod and reel combination. I can throw so many different baits with this sunbait right here. So those are the 5 rods I think you need if you're going to be out and be serious about your bass fishing. You can cover a wide variety of techniques with 1 or 2 of these rods that I told you, but if you really want to be well-rounded and throw a ton of different baits from little tiny finesse Ned rigs all the way up to a 10-inch glide bait, you can get it done with those 5 rods right there. I know a lot of you guys are probably in the comments right now telling me how this is a big commercial for my rod series. To be completely honest, I don't care if you guys go out and buy them or not. I love them and fish with them every single day, and I made them specifically for this to have a wide variety of different techniques that each individual rod series could work, because I fish every day. It does me no good to go out and have a rod that can only throw one bait or is only good for one specific technique. That's why I made this series, and that's why I think they'd work great for you. Otherwise, hopefully I was able to share some tips on what rods to go out and purchase of any make and model and what I think is important. But thanks so much for watching this one, Maffers. Let me know if you want to see more tip videos in the comments down below, and I'd love if you hit the subscribe button for more of these videos. Thanks for watching. Peace.